Have you ever looked into or studied what it takes for the human body to smell something? Yes, thank you for that. One amen there. I hadn't either until this week. If you want to know what my week looks like, it looks like this. I hear random things, I look into them further, and I figure out how to use them in a sermon like I'm going to today. So a lot of my time, not a lot of time, some of my time throughout the week is spent researching things that have nothing to do with spirituality, but they really connect to us in a real life way that does connect to what we're going to talk about today. But I want to give you some random information today. So you are welcome for this. You can use this wherever you would like. You're welcome for it. So here's some useless facts on smelling. Smelling starts in the back of our nose, in the back of our nasal cavity. There's a membrane back there that contains all these sensory neurons. It's like a membrane or tissue in the back of our nasal cavity. There's like nerve cells back there, and on the tips of these neurons are what they call receptors. Okay, so I'm getting way past my knowledge base here, so I had to really look this up and really study this to even be able to communicate this, and I'm going to try to do my best. But there's these receptors in the back of our nasal cavity on the neurons that are attached to the membrane in the back of our nasal cavity, all right? We have about 450 different receptors on this membrane, and these receptors are like locks, and the odor molecules are like the keys that unlock the lock, if that makes sense. Now, scientists used to believe that we could smell about 10,000 smells. The human body could smell 10,000 smells, but now, in 2020, they believe that we could smell up to 1 trillion different smells and odors with the human body through these 450 different receptors that are on this membrane. You have good smells. You may smell a lady's perfume, and it may take you back to it may be the perfume that your grandmother wore. And what is it? It's like this rush of emotion and all these memories will flood back into your brain because it's like, wow, like that just took me back really fast. You may even smell something like silly as Pine Sol or Fabuloso and like flashback to cleaning when you were a kid and all the chores, scrubbing. That smell that takes you back, it's like you remember the house that you were in, you remember the chore that you were doing, and all within a matter of milliseconds, this takes place as these receptors are sending signals and information to our brain to process all of this stuff. Now, you also have bad smells, like old gym clothes. You ever found some of your kids' old gym clothes before? Maybe a teenager's room. Those usually smell lovely at this time of year. We have, at our house, we've had a lot of flies around our house lately. I don't know if y'all have this at your house too, but it's like all the flies in the neighborhood have decided the Drake household is a place to be and party. And so we put up like the fly traps. You ever seen those things, like a little strip that you ribbon, you put up? We have them hanging all over the place. And they don't work, evidently, because nothing is on them. But they look horrible around the house, but we have them. So I was so tired of it. They fly in the house, you open the door, and you know how it is with kids, right? You know, it's like you tell them, don't open the door and don't leave it. But they like open the door and they just stand there for about 10 minutes, wait, hey, come on in, guys. Y'all just, all the flies right now. That's how it is at our house, at least. And so I was tired of it. We were tired of it, swatting flies at dinner time. So we bought one of these fly traps because we've seen people talking about them. And we thought, this will be great. And here's the truth. It works, these fly traps, but the only way to describe the stench that is coming out of this fly trap is repulsive. And if anybody has one of these around their house, it is almost unbearable, the smell that is coming from this. And as we do every afternoon, we go outside and we let the kids play, burn off the energy after dinner before we go get ready for bed. And the entire time, our brains are just firing on all cylinders because we get this whiff as the wind blows, and it's like gag-worthy, right in your nostrils. So you have good smells, you have bad smells. And so today, we're going to jump around a little bit in the scriptures, but in our main passage, we're going to see something that would be considered not a good smell in the nostrils of God. What does God hate? What does God dislike? We've been in our series Made to Worship for a few weeks now, and we know that God enjoys our worship. We know that God loves worship. He loves to see his children worshiping him and lifting up their hearts in their praise to him. But did you know that there's a type of worship that God does not like? One that is a bad smell to him. Today we're going to be in the book of Amos. If you have your Bible, you can turn. There's a minor prophet in the Old Testament. If you aren't sure where that's at, you can look at Amos chapter 5. is where we're going to be. Amos was like I said, a minor prophet. He was a shepherd and a fig tree farmer, prophet of God, living at this time. The nation of Israel was a divided kingdom. You had northern Israel and you had southern Judah. Now, northern Israel was led by a king named Jeroboam II, who was a great military leader, strong leader, captured land and resources. They became a very wealthy nation at this time, very strong leader in that way. But almost all the prophets agree, if not all of them, that Jeroboam II was a horrible leader when it came to spiritual or godly matters. So he's a great leader when it comes to military and strength and money and resources. That looks great, but when it came to the spiritual side, not so much. And so as this was going on, they allowed idolatry and injustice to take place. And Amos could not take it anymore. And he travels from southern Judah and he goes into the northern Israel and he comes to the city of Bethel and he starts announcing God's word to them. And we get this book of Amos is like a letter of poems and sermons or sermonettes that Amos is giving to the people of God at this time. So Amos chapter 5, verse 21 through 24, it'll be on the screens as well. Now, this is God speaking through the prophet Amos. I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Talk about strong words in the Bible here. This is so good. This is one of those moments, like, I don't know how you feel about this, but I appreciate when the scriptures give us hard, difficult passages like this to hear and to listen to. Because sometimes, although it stings, although it is painful to hear at times, a lot of times it's exactly what we need to hear. Kind of one of those dad talks this morning that you get where your dad sits you down and gives you the strong talking to for a little bit. That's kind of the feeling of this passage as Amos is speaking to the people of Israel. Like, listen, this is what the word of the Lord says and what you are doing. Now, there's obviously a lot going on in the nation of Israel at this time. But I think and I believe that there are a lot of correlations to what we see in our world today. And not just our world, but specifically the church world. And so as we look at this passage, remember, in context, Amos is speaking to the people of Israel. And so we don't want to take that out of context. We want to keep that in where it's at, but also look at the correlations to what we have in our world today. So main idea, if you're taking notes, is this. Worship without the right heart is no worship at all. Worship with the right heart is no worship at all. Verse 21, he says, I hate and I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Now, hate is a very, very strong word. It's a very strong word. It's one of those words that we instruct our children not to say, right? Because it has so much weight to it and so much power. And it's like, hey, don't say this word. You could say, I dislike something, or I don't enjoy this. It's one of those words you try to coach your kids to say a different word because it has so much meaning to it, so much weight. But this is a rejection of the worship by God. And one commentary said this is like a shudder of the spine. Like I don't know if you have something in your life that you dislike so much that when you see it or you experience it, there's like a shudder down your spine where it's like, I can't take that. For you, it may be a gecko. Outside on your porch at night when you open the door and you just get this like, I can't take it. Maybe snakes. I'm on this snake Facebook page, as I've been confessing to you over time. I'm on weather pages and now I'm on snake pages. I'm like becoming an old man right before all of your eyes, okay? And so on this snake page, like people will post and they'll say, that's a dangerous snake. And people are like, no, it's a beautiful snake. And in my mind, I'm like, nope, the only good snake is what? A dead snake, right? And you can argue with me, you can show me science, I'm not going to believe it. I don't like them. It may be spiders. It may be roaches. Whatever it is, it's just you just like them so much that it's like, just shudder of the spine. Now, that's the feel that we get when God's talking about the worship of the Israelites of this time, but a little bit stronger. He says, your feast, they make me sick. Do you feel the weight of what God's saying through Amos at this time? Do you feel the strong words coming through that it's like, wow. If there's a worship that God doesn't enjoy, it's got to be right here because I hate and I despise, I dislike your feast. It's not light, it's not fun and games, it's real and it's raw and it's powerful. How would we respond if a prophet from the Old Testament walked through, long beard, big robe, white beard, aged perfectly, comes through the back door and he stands up here and starts telling us all the things that we're doing wrong with our worship? We probably wouldn't respond to that very well. What security would be like, get him out of here. But in this time, Amos walks into this city of Bethel and he starts announcing these strong, strong words, because sometimes the strong words that God gives people through the scriptures or through a prophetic ministry like this, sometimes they're needed. And I believe they're needed in our time today. So the people of Israel are going through all of their religious duties. They're worshiping him the way that they're supposed to. They're going through the religious side of things, so to speak, but there's something was missing. He says, I take no delight. I despise. When you read this, it's like, wow, these are strong words that God is giving. Another translation for the phrase, I take no delight, is I cannot smell your worship. I can't smell your worship. If you remember in the Old Covenant, worship was done through sacrifice and ritual, and so they would sacrifice an animal or a grain offering on the altar, and they would see the smoke go up. And as the smoke would go up and dissipate, it was seen as a fragrant smell in the nostrils of God. And Amos is saying, the Lord tells you that I can't even smell your worship. I turn my nose at your worship because it's so repulsive. As we would shudder at a repulsive smell that we smell in our world today, it's almost the feel that we get that God is doing with their worship. Your worship is so uninteresting because of what is going on around you. Like, I just can't even smell it. Now, wait a second. That doesn't sound like a very gracious and loving God, does it? That doesn't sound like a very gracious and loving God. What about the sinner? Can the sinner come in and come to worship? Will God be loving and gracious to them? I would say that a lot of times a sinner coming, somebody that is not a believer, when I say a sinner, I don't mean that in a condemning way. I mean somebody that is not a believer and follower of Jesus. If they were to come through our doors today seeking Jesus, most of the time, they're coming with more of a heart that God is looking for than what we have. Because their heart is truly seeking after the Lord when our heart has found complacency and normalcy and we get wrapped up in the ritual of what we do here on a Sunday morning. Yes, God is gracious. Yes, God is loving. He's kind, all those things. But our hearts, do our hearts get complacent? Do our hearts get wrapped up in all the other things that we experience in our world? Have we bought into a check-the-box mentality when it comes to worship? You feel the weight of what Amos is saying to the people of Israel this time. It is heavy, it is raw, but it is so true, and it's something that I believe that we need today. Verse 23 says this, take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. Now, growing up, I wanted to be just like Josh Masters growing up. I wanted to be able to play any instrument and to be able to do it well. And so I practiced all kinds of different instruments in our house. I started with the drums. My older brother was a drummer, and I'm a little bit competitive. So I thought if I could ever be a better drummer than him, then I'll do it just for that. And then I started playing the guitar because the worship team and the children's ministry needed a guitar player. So I'm like, sure, I had a lot of pride issues. I can play guitar. And then I started playing saxophone in the band and was not great at it. All these instruments that I would try to do. And my poor mom, all the time. Because when I do something, I try to do it all the way. I made so much sound in our house growing up. It was awful. I mean, have you ever heard somebody try to play the saxophone when they're just learning? It's not good. It is not. I know you want to think like, I wouldn't think that about my kids. You would, trust me. It is awful. And so I was learning all these instruments. And so just a few years ago, my dad, who's such a loving person, decided for one of our sons' birthdays, he bought them a drum set just to repay the favor. I think that's what grandparenting looks like right there. All the things that we did to our parents growing up, they're like, just going to give you a little taste of it. God says, I don't even want the noise. God's nose is closed. He's not smelling the worship. Now his ears and his eyes are closed, and he's not listening to the noise of their worship. That sounds, I don't know what hell is going to be exactly like, but that sounds pretty awful to say that as we worship, if we are not worshiping in the right way, that God would turn his nose away from us. His eyes would be closed and his ears would be closed. He would not hear anything. What an awful place to be, but here's the catch. And what I think God is trying to get to the people of Israel through Amos is that religious activity is never what God is after. God is always after our hearts. He is never after a song. He's never after us just lifting our voice or us just lifting our hands or us just playing an instrument. That is never what he's after. He's always after and concerned with the hearts. But how many times have we gone just through the motions when it comes to worship? When I say worship, I'm not talking about just Sunday morning, just a worship set, just a worship song. I'm talking about a life of worship that we live, that we have been called to live. How many times have we just gone through the motions, a fake it till you make it kind of mentality? I'm just going to sing this song and I'm just going to play this instrument. And I imagine God in heaven saying, no, no, no. I'm not interested in just a song. I'm not interested in just your singing or your musical ability or any of that. I'm interested in your heart. Does God have your heart this morning? Does he have the attention of your heart this morning? Have we missed this? Have we allowed our attention to be on the wrong things in our world? And I would venture to say with so many things that are pulling for our attention these days, yes. We get so wrapped up in the news cycle. We get wrapped up in the social media craze, and we get wrapped up in the pursuit of things and money and resources and all the things that are pulling and vying for our attention. Have we allowed our heart to wander to other things? Verse 24. He says, but let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Now, the people were going through all of their religious duties. Everything seems great, right? They're sacrificing animals. They're worshiping him in a way that they have been called to do, making sacrifices, playing instruments, singing songs, but God rejected their worship. Why in the world would a God who loves his children reject the worship of his people that are doing what he's asked them to do? Why would he do that? Couple of things. They weren't living like God's people should live, and their heart did not line up with their actions. Now, their personal lives were not righteous. They were not living the way that God had called them to, which is a part of being a believer, a follower of Jesus. And then the second thing is that they were neglecting the needy around them. Now, thankfully, as a follower of Christ and a believer in the New Covenant, the New Testament, as a follower of Jesus, we don't have to earn our way, and we don't have to live a righteous way in a sense to earn God's love or to earn our salvation. That would be considered a salvation of works and completely opposite of what the gospel calls us to. So they're doing these things. They're not living the way that God calls them to live. And here's the reality, though, is that as a believer in Jesus, we have been saved, and with our lives, we live our lives in righteousness, not out of duty, but out of thankfulness and out of worship. We we will never be disappointed by trying to live more godly in our lives. I want you to hear that really clearly this morning, because there is a sense that we see in our culture. You see, I don't know if this was like when you were growing up. When I was growing up, it felt like it was very structured and very legalistic. So we were way over on this side, to where it was like, if you mess up at all, and I grew up in a church culture that I felt insecure of my salvation, because I felt like if I would mess up at all, that God wasn't going to love me anymore. So we have a legalism mentality, but we've seen the pendulum swing really far to the right, to grace, 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 and no truth, where Jesus says, no, I'm not on one side or the other. I'm right in the middle, with full of grace and full of truth. And so we don't live our lives out of duty. We live it out of thankfulness, a life of righteousness, of serving God and becoming more like him, the process of sanctification. We've been called to live a life that's worthy of the gospel. And God was saying, I'm rejecting your worship because there's no heart in your worship. It's mindless actions that you are just going through. How many times have we found ourselves in that same situation, just mindless actions, just going through motions, when God's shouting from the rooftop saying, I want your heart. I don't want just your actions. Your actions will follow. Your response will follow. I want your heart. Now, the people of Israel, they'd become so apathetic that they started worshiping idols. Idols of other countries and gods of other countries. And again, as we've said time and time again in this series, is that for the most part, we don't have physical idols that we'll see throughout our world. You can go to Haiti and Cuba right now, and you can walk into a house and you'll see idols in a house like that they pray to these little figurines. But for the most part, in our context, we don't see idol worship. But we are very sophisticated, and our culture is a culture full of worshiping things that are not God. So we hide it and we cover it really well, but they're worshiping these idols, and God's saying, listen, you're going through all this stuff. You're doing all these rituals. You're sacrificing animals. You're burning grain offering. You're singing songs. Great. But I'm turning my nose and I'm closing my eyes and ears because your heart's not in it. The other part that God was upset at was injustice. He says, let justice roll down like waters. The people of God were not caring for those that were in need around them. Now, you might hear that word justice or injustice, and you might think, okay, don't get political on us here. But here's what I would say to you, is that talking about justice and taking care of those that have been not been taken care of in our culture and our world, it's not political, it's biblical. When we look at the scriptures, it is just stock full of taking care of the needy, taking care of the sojourner, welcoming them into your house. Hey, don't cut the vines along your fence so that the sojourner, as they're walking through your country, let them pick the fruit of your labor, even though you're going to get nothing of it. See how God calls us to a life of serving those that have been dealt unjustly in our world? It's not political, it's biblical to care for the needy and the ones that need it the most. Here's the reality. I will get a little political. If churches in our world would do what God has called us to do to take care of the needy, we wouldn't need governments to help us anywhere in our world. But Christ followers and churches, we need to be pursuing the needy, pursuing the unjust, those that have been hurt and broken by our world, and say, listen, we're here to love you and serve you. The world will know we are believers by the way that we love them. So they're not living this righteous lifestyle. They're also not taking care of those around them, but they're still worshiping. They're still sacrificing animals. And God says, I hate and I despise your religious festivals. I will not even smell the smoke of your offering to me because you are not doing the things that I've called you to do. In our time, we might call what the Israelites were doing a hypocritical worship. We might point our finger at them like in judgment and say, you're a hypocrite. You are worshiping God, but you're not living like you have been called to live. Because hypocritical worship, the focus is on the act, the song, the singing, the music, but it forgets that worship is about our whole life, not just a Sunday moment. Have you been focusing on your heart? Have we neglected parts of our lives that we should honor God? Have we neglected people in our culture that we should be focusing in on so that we can love and care for people? Because all the people in our world are still God's creation, no matter how we look like, no matter what difference they look like or don't look like us, or whatever we might disagree with them on, they're still God's creation. Have we been taking care of people, and have we been living a life that God has called us to live? Let's look at, if you'll do me a favor and you'll flip over just a little bit to Psalms. We're going to be in Psalms chapter 24 to close out today. Psalms chapter 24, David writing right after the very popular Psalms 23, one of the most famous passages in the Bible. Now, first chapter 24 starts with this: the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The world and all those who dwell in it dwell therein, for he has founded it upon the seas, and he established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. This psalm is what is called an entrance liturgy, that many pilgrims would read this psalm as they were entering into the city of Jerusalem to go into the temple to offer sacrifices and worship to God. They would enter in and say this, in verses 1 through 2 are really about acknowledging who God is. It's putting us as the created beings in our proper place and putting God in his proper place and allowing the created to worship the creator. All that is in the earth is yours, Lord. Not just the earth itself, but everything that is in it. You founded it. You are the creator. And what a beautiful thought. If we could start our worship in our hearts before we ever show up on a Sunday, that all throughout the week, that we could say a line like this: that everything in this world is yours, including myself, Lord. Putting ourselves in our proper place and putting God in his proper place. I believe if we could start like that, it would solve a lot of problems that we have in our world. If we would take this posture of worship, a posture of humbleness, of thankfulness that God, you are the creator of everything, the world and everything in it, including myself, God, and I'm here as a humble servant to worship you. Verse 3 says, who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord? And who shall stand in his holy place? Now, when we were kids, I grew up in an all-boy house. And you may have been a girl and played this, but it was rough around the house all the time. It was just, if you've grown up in a boy house or around boys, you know it can get rough and wild really, really quick. But we would play this game called King of the Hill. Do y'all remember that game? You know that game? And it's basically you have a dirt mound, and evidently we didn't have toys growing up because we were always doing something with dirt or piles of dirt, and you just make it fun. And so you stand on top of this hill, and people will run up to the top of the hill, and you got to try to push them down, and you're trying to pull them down. And the person that wins is the person that withstands and stays on top of the hill, right? The strongest, the toughest, the one with the most strength, standing on top of the hill like you've conquered the world, like yeah. Like Rocky at the top of the steps. In the kingdom of God, it is not the strongest or the toughest, but it is the humble and the pure-hearted person that wins. It says, who shall stand in his holy place? It could be reworded this: who would dare stand in the presence of God? Again, reminding themselves as they're about to walk into the temple of the Lord to serve and to worship him. He's saying, who would dare stand in the presence of God? This is the fear and the awe that we have lost in our culture today, that we have casually walked into this relationship with Jesus at times, and we casually forget that this is unique and this is real. This is powerful, that the Holy Spirit is indwelling in us as believers. We have the very presence of God inside of us, and we can sometimes forget that, wow, this is a gift. He's saying, who can ascend to the hill of the Lord? Not the strongest, not the one with most of strength or the toughest. And he gives us the answer in verse 4, he who has clean hands and a pure heart. Who could stand in the presence of a holy God? It's not the strongest, it's the one with clean hands and a pure heart, and he who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. Clean hands meaning a person with pure deeds and a pure heart, pure thoughts. What this does not mean is that God is looking for people that are perfect to be able to worship him. We know as sinful human beings, we have a natural bent towards sin. We know that is not possible for us to live a perfect life. So it is not that God is looking for a person that is perfect, but he says, I want somebody that's got clean hands and a pure heart that can come into my presence. And the reality is this is the only way that we are able to come into the presence of God as sinful human being, into the holy presence of God, is through Jesus and his finished work. It is not by our righteousness. It is not by our work or our discipline that we are good enough to will ourselves to this good life so we can make it into the presence of God. No, it is only by the presence, or it is only by the work of Jesus that we're able to be in the presence of God. Jesus became our ritualistic cleansing for us. As we talked about last week, that the pilgrims would ritualistically clean. They would go into the mikveh, the bathing bath, and they would purify themselves before they could ever walk into the temple, onto the Temple Mount. Jesus became that for us, but I believe that this does link back to the prophecy about Amos. Are our words and actions lining up with our beliefs? Do our actions and our words line up with our beliefs? Because if they aren't, then I would say that we should look at our heart. He ends at one little passage and he says, the one who doesn't lift up their soul to another, idol worship. Although we don't see it like in physical form, we are very sophisticated. We hide them well, the idols that we have. It could be physical appearance, it could be money, it could be success, it could be sports. Lindsay, don't listen to that, okay? It could be a lot of things in our life that we lift up. We have these idols in our life that we hold tightly to, and we squeeze them, and it squeezes the life out of us because it consumes all that we are. God's saying, I don't want you to lift your soul up to anything else. I want your heart. Now you may be listening to this passage or this message and think and say, wow, I thought we were talking about a pure heart and all we've done is talk about our actions. But I want you to listen to this quote from scholar Daniel Block. He says this: Scriptures never divorce a person from their actions or their hearts from their deeds. Scriptures never divorce a person from their actions or their hearts from their deeds. Our hearts and our actions are so intermingled that they are inseparable. That's why when people say things like, if they're in an abusive relationship, a person might say, well, nobody knows him like I do. He's got a good heart. No, he doesn't. First of all, no one really has a good heart. We're sinful human beings. But our actions will always follow our heart. What we believe in our heart, in the depths of our soul, our actions will follow that. The Scriptures never divorce a person from their actions and their hearts from their deeds. Here's the truth for us. We are so prone as human beings to let our hearts wander that we sometimes need a check like this. Josh, team, you can come. We sometimes need a check like this, that God is calling us to a life of worship that is not driven by motions or actions or empty actions or to just sing a song or to just lift up our voice or lift our hands or consider worship being something we do just 1 hour on a Sunday morning. What God is after is he's after our hearts. So sometimes we need that. Check 1 Corinthians chapter 10. You might be here today and think, well, I'm pretty good. I got this thing down. I'm not worshiping idols, so that's good. I feel like I'm not just going through the motions, but I would encourage us to, all of us, every single one of us, to look inwardly and think about this verse 12. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed, lest he fall. Take heed, look inward. Have I just been going through the motions, or am I enjoying the beauty of who Jesus is? Our journey of following Jesus is not always going to be rainbows and butterflies. I understand that, and I know that. But are we delighting in who he is? Are we enjoying his presence? Are we soaking up all that he has for us and the gifts and the blessings that he gives to us? Are we enjoying our journey with him? If we're not, then it's about our heart. Worship without the right heart is no worship at all. There was a church in Watford, England. The pastor sensed that the church had lost its perspective on worship. He felt as worship was going on in the service, he was like, man, we've just lost it. I don't know what's going on here, but it's not worship. So he took away the worship team. I'm not going to do that, okay? Y'all are good. Took away the worship team. He took away the lights. He took away the sound system. He took away all the conveniences that we would consider this makes a good worship service. He said, for a season, we're just going to use our voices. He took a gamble. He said, what if we take a season and we take the nice things away, if we take all the conveniences away, and all we had were our voices in Jesus? Would it be enough? It was during this season that the church's worship pastor wrote a song, famous song titled The Heart of Worship by Matt Redman. And what a thought that we as believers, if we could take everything away, if we could strip everything away, and take the noise, take the distractions, take the idol worship away out of our lives, and we turn our hearts fully on the attention of Jesus, the only one that is worthy of our worship. Just him. Bow your heads with me this morning.